The rabbis and the cantors, we were talking about this one thing. I think we talked about it this week. It might have been probably last week. It was probably the week before that. We talk about it most weeks. Is that people come up to us and they look us straight in the eye and they go, "Rabbi, you have to talk about Israel this Friday." I mean, where else am I going to hear about it? Because it feels like the entire world is against us. And then, at the end of that sentence, when they're not looking at us, it feels as if we pivot on our foot and we turn this direction and someone comes up and they go, "Rabbi, can you please not talk about Israel?" I don't come here for that. I come here for Judaism and Torah and the Parsha, because honestly, where else am I supposed to get that? Because it feels like when I'm out there, the entire world is against us. And we've been getting this week in, and we've been getting it week out. And I've noticed that there is a feeling growing in our community of isolation and feeling as if the world is against us. And I know that's not for everyone, but the number of people who have been actively engaged in the BLM movement or the Me Too movement and so on, they have felt like they've been left alone, standing alone. Either from deafening silence that no one has stood up against the rape of women on October 7th, or sometimes it's not just silence, it's been pure anti-Semitism. And the question that keeps coming up is, where am I safe? And it's not just physically, but where do I fit in society now? And what am I supposed to do? And believe it or not, this is the primary question that this week's Parsha is trying to address, after last week's Torah portion about Amalek. I mean, not if I should talk about Israel or if I shouldn't talk about Israel, but what should the Jewish reaction be when it feels like the entire world is against us? When we feel like I just need to get into my synagogue or into my Jewish community where it's safe. And it reminds me of the weather that we have been having over these past few weeks. When it really starts coming down and it's raining, you see everyone, they're running, trying to get to the awning or to inside. And finally, when they come in, take a breath, they relax. And there has been a national trend right now of people running into Jewish life. More people have joined the synagogue. More people have joined the synagogue around the United States as the rains and the winds of anti-Semitism are lashing. We're all coming in from the storm, and we are looking each other in the eyes and asking, what is happening? Where am I safe? And ultimately, what should we do? That is what this week's Torah portion, Yitro, is trying to answer. And why it's placed immediately next to last week's Torah portion that focuses on Amalek, who brutally attacks the Jewish people. Now, to begin, you have to look at where we are in the Torah. You need to know the setting, because we're in Exodus. We're free from Egypt, and we're on our way to Sinai. And so to begin, the Jewish people, they may no longer be enslaved, but they have a clear and a fresh memory of what oppression and anti-Semitism looks like, much like in our community. We may not have grown up in the 1930s or the 1940s, but we do have a vivid memory of it. When October 7th came, Jews all over the world, they immediately had a word to describe what they saw: pogrom. When we saw the flyers in downtown that said, "Boycott Jewish businesses," we had seen that before. Maybe not here in San Francisco. We saw that in Germany, and we recognized them. Now, when the Jews of the Exodus are in the desert and they're fleeing to freedom, when they're thirsty and they're tired, it's right then when the Amalekites brutally attack them. Now, according to Deuteronomy, the attack is described as particularly savage and a heartless assault, where the Amalekites, they cut down and they killed the most vulnerable among all the Israelites. And wasn't new for the Israelites that had memories of Egypt. In Egypt, their male babies were killed. Here, all of the children and the weak are attacked. So the natural reaction one could imagine among the Israelites is to become more and more insular, to completely distrust anyone who's not a Jew, anyone who's not one of them. But Parshat Yitro is written in a way to teach us the exact opposite lesson. We read about Amalek right before Yitro enters the picture. Yitro is Moses' non-Jewish father-in-law. Yes, Moses was in an interfaith marriage. And Yitro is the complete opposite of Amalek. Yitro, he does not disparage Moses or the Jewish people, but rather he relishes in awe of all the Israelites, of everything that's happened to them, the way God has treated them. And so these two non-Jews, Amalek and Yitro, are being side by side in our story. It's not coincidence, but rather they're drawn next to each other like a white line next to a black line, each accentuating the other because of their extreme contrast. Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra of the 12th century suggests that the Torah puts these two events in this order, which are actually out of chronological order, for the sole purpose of drawing our attention to the stark contrast between them. Rabbi Moses David Kasuto from the 20th century, he highlights the dramatic literary cues found within the text. In the Amalek episode, there's a repetition of the word for battle, and it says it over and over again. In the Yitro story, it begins and it ends with the word for peace. In the Amalek story, Moses chooses men for war. In the Yitro story, Moses chooses men to bring justice into their society. In the Amalek story, Moses comes and he sits on a rock to pray for victory in a battle. When Yitro comes, he sits to judge the people. Now, after Egypt and Amalek, the Israelites, they could naturally assume that all non-Jews will eventually attack them. After the pogroms in Eastern Europe, after being kicked out of Yemen, after being murdered in Germany, after what the members of Kibbutz Be'eri shared last night sitting right here from the Bima, after seeing when you're on Clement Street the words that were written again this week that say, "Kill the Jews," one could naturally fall into the place that they are against us. But that would be the wrong reaction. That's why Yitro is placed right within this Torah portion. When we assume they are all the same and they are all against us, we are doing the same thing by dehumanizing others the way that they have dehumanized us. And Yitro is placed right here in arguably the most important Torah portion in the entire Torah, to remind us that justice and goodness are not solely owned by the Jewish people. It goes even a step further, which is what makes this parsha arguably the most important Torah portion in the entire Torah. Because this is the parsha where we receive the Torah, where we get the Ten Commandments. We get the operating system that will spur all of Jewish thought and wisdom from that moment at Sinai all the way to this very breath that we are taking in this moment right now. And we never would have gotten the Torah without Yitro's wisdom to guide Moses and his leadership. You see, this parsha, it's not whispering to us, it's yelling at us that wisdom is not owned solely by the Jewish people, but that we must be expansive and open in our thinking. Because Yitro's wisdom is the foundation for us to receive the Torah. So when we are asked to talk about Israel, when we are asked not to talk about Israel, when we are asked to talk about the Torah or we're asked not to talk about the Torah, there is no way to be in the Jewish conversation without understanding that it is that. It's a conversation. It's a thousands of year old conversation that began even before Mount Sinai and will continue way past San Francisco. Because our past speaks to our present. And in doing so, it offers an old and a new perspective on how we are supposed to confront the times that we find ourselves in. In these moments, when we may feel the urge to retreat just into the Jewish community in the face of anti-Semitism, we are reminded loud and clear that if we want peace in the world, if we want justice in the world, we must celebrate the revelation at Sinai, but not at the expense of not engaging with all of those in our society and in our world. When we start to think of them as them, we've lost the thread of the conversation. It's our duty and it's our obligation to look others straight in the eye and to see that there's humanity in all of us and that we have far more in common than we do not have common, and to learn and to grow from each other than instead of isolating ourselves. We would not be sitting here tonight. You wouldn't be sitting here tonight if it wasn't for Yitro. Our future is directly bound with those who live and journey with us. When we look at social justice movements that we have stood with and we have fought with, and we find that we now stand alone, that does not mean you no longer engage in the world. To just run to Mount Sinai or to the Jewish community and to turn our backs. Nope. It's actually the exact opposite. It means, as uncomfortable as it is, to actually work harder, to reach out to those who we have relationships with, and even those we had relationships with. To relish in the beauty and the comfort and the wisdom of this Jewish community, and then to use that as a reservoir of strength and comfort as we face the real world and we head back out into the rains and into the winds, knowing that other shelters exist and that the way we make storms let up is by reaching out and engaging and in learning and celebrating the Yitros of our world. Because there are far more Yitros than there are Amaleks. Can you hear out song?